Thank you for coming. I am Arian Mack. I'm a professor of psychology here at the New School for Social Research, and a very long time editor of social research, its journal, since 1934, which was started by the group of rescued, largely German scholars, by that first president of the United States that formed the University in Exile. It's an extraordinary heritage to live with. We'd like to welcome you to the new school and the 11th in our Public Voices series from the Center for Public Scholarship, which I have the good fortune to run. The Public Voices series, which began in 2012, is meant to provide a platform for distinguished public figures and scholars to address the most pressing issues of the day. We've been very fortunate to have such distinguished speakers as Russ Feingold, Steven Pinker, Robert J. Lifton. These are in no particular order: Nicholas Everstadt, William Galston, Barney Frank, James Manford, and Naomi Oreskes. Our social research conference series, which we began in 1988, is also housed under the umbrella of the Center for Public Scholarship. And I'd like to just alert you to the fact that on April 20th and 21st, that is very soon, we will be hosting our 36th conference titled Invisibility, the Power of an Idea, which we welcome you to attend. This conference examines the both remarkably positive and intriguing aspects of invisibility, as well as the equally powerful and painful downsides of it in the physical sciences, the social sciences, the humanities, and in our lived lives. We are extremely pleased that the renowned physicist and cosmologist Brian Greene will be participating in that event, keynote event of the conference, along with the distinguished humanist and author Marina Warner on the evening of April 20th. Another and extremely important project that we believe that lives under the umbrella of the Center for Public Scholarship at the New School is our Endangered Scholar Worldwide initiative, which we started in 2007 to respond to the persecution and wrongful imprisonment of scholars and students around the world. It's very much, of course, in keeping with our heritage and the University in Exile. The Endangered Scholar Worldwide website provides a much-needed source of information about the many scholars and students at risk and in prison around the world, and affords the opportunity to sign letters and petitions in their support. In light of the recent crackdown in academics in Turkey and the move just this week by the Hungarian parliament to shut down the Central European University in Budapest, we urge you to visit our website, endangeredscholarsworldwide.net, and join us in our calls for action against the many violations of free inquiry occurring in universities and to scholars all over the world. This evening, our Public Voices event titled Their America, the U.S. in the Eyes of the Rest of the World Post-Election, is a return to a topic that we actually covered once before in 2004 with a social research conference. That conference was entitled Their America, the U.S. in the Eyes of the Rest of the World, period. That conference examined the anti-American sentiments in other countries following 9/11. In the aftermath of this most divisive and a shocking campaign and election, the United States is again under intense scrutiny from the international community. So it seems a moment that begged once more for addressing the issue of America in the eyes of the rest of the world, particularly given President Trump's wild remarks about foreign policy, wild as non-negative as it ought to be, his threat to tear up the nuclear agreement with Iran, his attempts to add a travel ban from predominantly from immigrants largely from Muslim countries, and to deport massive numbers of undocumented residents, and to build a wall to keep out those who we should be welcoming. If these threats, and some of them have already been carried out, are all carried out, they undoubtedly will have serious impact on the U.S. and and the rest of the world. Thus, the need for tonight's discussion with our most distinguished group of experts who we're honored to have with us tonight. This evening's discussion has been funded by a generous grant from Carnegie Corp of New York, for which I am extremely grateful. Joining us tonight as a moderator of the discussion is my longtime acquaintance, Aryeh Neier, President Emeritus of the Open Society Foundations and Distinguished Visiting Professor at the Paris School of International Affairs of Sciences Po. He served as president for the Open Society Foundations from 1993 to 2012. He served as the founding executive director of Human Rights Watch, and before that, as executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union. His most recent book is The International Human Rights Movement, A History, Princeton, 2012. He once long ago, before most people had heard of her, described Samantha Power to me as a rising human rights superstar. In fact, it is Aryeh himself who is the real embodiment of a human rights superstar, and so I feel extremely honored to have him here with us tonight, and it's with great, great pleasure that I now turn over the mic to him and to the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arian. As Arian indicated, we have an extraordinary panel this afternoon or this evening. I think it would be very hard to find a number of people who are as well qualified as the people who have been assembled this evening to speak about the subject of the United States, or the United States in the eyes of the rest of the world. Before I introduce the panel members, let me just comment briefly. I think this is fairly obvious to everybody, and that is that the way the United States is regarded in the rest of the world matters not only to the rest of the world, but it matters to the United States. It matters to the United States in terms of our economic relations with the rest of the world, our trade relations. It matters in terms of our ability to address the environmental issues that confront all of us. It matters if we are going to have a voice internationally in dealing with human rights matters. It matters if we're going to be able to address the problem of terrorism. And in that connection, one should point out what you know. And that is, terrorism is an issue that affects Americans, not just in the United States, but places where Americans congregate, hotels, restaurants, and so forth, have often been terrorist targets in other parts of the world, and therefore it matters to the United States if Americans travel in the rest of the world. It matters if we're going to be able to deal with the problem of immigration in a rational manner. It matters even so far as education is concerned, because our universities depend to a very considerable extent on the income they obtain from students from the rest of the world. And if the opinion of the United States in other countries shifts substantially, the impact on many American universities could be quite significant. And then probably the area in which it matters the most from the standpoint of the United States has to do with the question of war and peace. Sitting next to me is Jerry Cohen, a renowned expert on China and other countries of East Asia. Jerry can articulate this far better than I can, but there are at least 3 potential armed conflicts where the attitude of China to the United States matters a great deal. A potential conflict with North Korea, a potential conflict over Taiwan, and a potential conflict over the South China Sea. So it matters a great deal how the rest of the world thinks about the United States. I will introduce all of the members of the panel now, and then I will call on them in the order in which they are listed in the program. As I say, sitting to my left is Jerome Cohen. Jerome Cohen is identified here as the director of the U.S. Asia Law Institute and a professor at New York University Law School. I would say that Jerry Cohen is the person who everybody regards as the dean of scholars of East Asian law. He has been the most important person in the field, the most prestigious person in the field for a great many years, and everybody who is concerned with the subject wants to know the views of Jerry Cohen. He is also a prolific writer of op-ed articles and other articles, and one could go on at great length, but I won't. Sitting next to him is Oz Frankel. Oz Frankel is Associate Professor of History at the New School for Social Research, our host institution. Professor Frankel could talk from the standpoint of a number of different parts of the world, but he will focus on the attitude towards the United States in this period in Israel. And then sitting next to him is Masha Gessen. Masha Gessen is a Russian-born writer, immigrated to the United States at the age of 14, but has been a correspondent in Russia, is a prolific author. I think she has published something like 10 books. And I saw in today's New York Times that she was among the current recipients of the Guggenheim Fellowship. So congratulations, Masha, for the receipt of the fellowship. Sitting next to her is Laura Secor. I haven't known Laura Secor previously, but I've been an admirer of her writing in the New Yorker and the New York Times and elsewhere, particularly focusing on Iran. She is the author of a recent, highly praised book, Children of Paradise, The Struggle for the Soul of Iran. And then finally, at my far left is my longtime colleague, Jose Miguel Vivanco. Jose Miguel is a Chilean lawyer. He has been the director for many years of the Americas Division of Human Rights Watch. Certainly one of the most knowledgeable people anywhere about Latin America and human rights in Latin America. He is, I think, particularly known for some of his work on Venezuela. He has recently been focusing quite a lot on Venezuela and Mexico, and those are two countries where the role of the United States looms very large at this time, and so I think he will focus in his remarks on those countries. And so then let me begin in the same order in which I introduced people, the order in which they are listed in the program, and ask Jerry Cohen to speak. And I should say that I've asked people to speak fairly briefly at the outset so that we can then conduct a conversation and later on bring in questions from the audience. Jerry?
Well, thank you very much, Aryeh. My function, obviously, is to provide a little bit of instant China for busy people. Trying to let you know what people are saying post-American election in China is an impossible task. As you may have heard, China is 1.4 billion people, 22% of the world, and a very diverse group, even within a relatively homogeneous society. What really matters is what Xi Jinping thinks about the world. And as far as I could tell from the reports late this afternoon, it's a rather anodyne view in the sense of what he and our dear President Trump have offered the public. It looks like love and kisses, and it may disappoint a lot of Trump supporters because after making many hostile and sometimes mistaken statements, this seemed to be a beginning of a romance. And let's hope that when they come to deal with the kinds of questions that Aryeh has correctly pointed out we have to deal with, that it will continue to be friendly. I'd be surprised, but let's hope so. There are 90 million people in the Communist Party of China, and some of them really matter. People in the Politburo Standing Committee, people in the Politburo, people in the Central Committee. China is increasingly centralized under its current leader, Xi Jinping. But you have very important party members throughout the country serving in various capacities. You have a huge government bureaucracy, 64 million people, and what they think matters. Of course, you've got a huge number of people in industry, including people in the government who lead industry, and you have growing crony capitalism as the people who are making fortunes in China have very close relations, inevitably, with the party leaders and their families. Some government agencies are particularly important, as they are here. Their Ministry of Foreign Affairs, of course, is useful, but often they don't have the final say. The politicians will have the final say, but also the military, and what the military thinks of the United States, even post-election, may not be the same as what many of the foreign affairs specialists think. And of course, you've got all kinds of think tanks that are increasingly important, although their think tanks tend to say what they think the leadership wants to hear. And you've got intellectuals to burn in China. You've got a huge number of educators, teachers, scholars, researchers, and their opinions are important, even if they're not entirely free to express them. The masses count to a certain extent, but you have to distinguish between the urban masses and the rural masses. And China is increasingly urban, but rural people still count a lot. But what do they think? It's a non-transparent system. We can't really tell what they think. There is some polling, but it's often very limited. We don't have access to the people of China in the way we might have access to the people of Western democracies, I include Japan and India in that group. I like the story of the retired diplomat who was taking part in a seminar at Beijing University to talk about international politics. And as they went around the table discussing a vital issue, he never said anything. And toward the end of the discussion, they said, well, aren't you going to give an opinion? He said, look, I haven't given an opinion honestly in 40 years. I'm not going to start now. And that is the trouble, especially in recent years since Xi Jinping came to power in the fall of 2012. The country has become increasingly repressive, and fear is growing. Fear grows in, of course, the human rights activists and their lawyers who are being suppressed and tortured. But fear also exists among the business elite. And that's why you see so much money leaving China and why New York real estate prices continue to rise. And you have fear among the intellectuals, and including teachers. Many people here are teachers. And as one said to me yesterday, I don't know who's in the classroom. Of course they know it's students, but what she meant was she doesn't know which of the students is going to report what she said and to what extent she'll be called to account the next day for expressing an opinion, whether for Trump or after Trump, against Trump. So it's very hard to tell. But some things are clear, even if occasionally they appear contradictory. Trump is very popular in China, and he'll probably be more popular after the last day-and-a-half conference. People like the fact that he's informal, he's very different from the highly scripted leaders of China who aren't very personable in public, even if their spouses accompany them. But they like Trump's style, and they like his unpredictability since they don't have to deal with it normally. They think Trump is a very successful business person, and they admire that. And they don't know about ethical problems or past bankruptcies, etc. They only know the brand and that he's made a lot of money and hasn't had to pay much tax, which is also admired in China. So they like the Trump family. And as you saw in the Times the other day, Ivanka is very, very popular. And the young women of China particularly find her a terrific role model because she's smart, she takes part in politics, her father seems to value her opinion, she has her own business, and she's very attractive. And this embodies many of the traits that the Chinese youth bent upon success and influence admire very much. I think what we see is a portrait of the Trump family that doesn't include many warts, and maybe that's useful. But China's image of America is shaped by many things. One is House of Cards. It's been hugely popular in China, and they love the intrigue, murder, dirty politics. This colors their image of America, and the more sophisticated begin to think it might even give them some insight into what takes place in their own leadership. Chinese media and TV, etc., are getting a little bit more daring in portraying the problems at home because of the anti-corruption drive that the leader has foisted on the country. It has involved more than 1 million suspects. They're often treated very harshly. It's also reached some of the political opponents of Xi Jinping. And this campaign has made people eager to learn more about corruption and Chinese version of capitalism, etc. What can we think about the future of Chinese opinion? Censorship is getting ever tighter. And it isn't only censorship. the great media wall against foreign information. Talk about fake information. There are huge numbers of people on the government payroll who are paid to put favorable information to the government on the internet and social media. So this gives people an entirely skewed view of what's going on in the country. What we can tell is that the Chinese people live in a non-transparent world, and they will think eventually about America's new leadership, what their government tells them to think about their new leadership. And they will think in a highly nationalistic fashion, because what Xi Jinping is engaged in is trying to mobilize popular support by taking nationalistic positions in the last few years. And that raises some serious problems for the future, to what extent he even can engage in compromise on questions relating to the South China Sea or the East China Sea. I anticipate no compromise whatever with respect to the question of relations with Taiwan. So what we're seeing is the ability of the government to shape people's continuing images of the world. And those who seek to challenge it will suffer, and they do suffer. There's almost no room now for freedom of speech, for freedom of association, for freedom of assembly. And for those who are deemed dissident, there is no due process of law. People disappear now. There's not only use of the formal criminal justice system to suppress opinion, but kidnapping, hoodlums employed by the police who can kidnap people, torture them, beat them. This has become a lawless problem. The Communist Party is subject to special discipline, where people can be detained by the Discipline Inspection Commission, and they can disappear for long periods. And the commission will decide what to do with them, including sending them for formal criminal punishment, or just dismissing them, or keeping them without legal authorization under house arrest. The most feared recent sanction is called residential surveillance. It sounds good. It sounds like house arrest rather than prison. But under this new form of residential surveillance, it's not your house, it's their house. And you can stay for 6 months, no charges against you, no opportunity to see your family or be in touch. They don't even know where you are, no chance to see a lawyer. It's a very severe sanction, and it happens now to foreigners also, and to outsiders. I've been working today on a case of a Taiwan human rights activist who went back to China a couple of weeks ago, and he disappeared for 10 days until foreign pressure forced them to say, yes, they had him. But beyond that, we don't know. His wife's going on Monday with the hope of trying to get official permission to see him. The foreign NGO law, a law to restrict the activities of foreign governments and agencies or foundations that are really funded by foreign governments, is really a serious problem now. So it's not a happy picture unless you just focus on some of the pranks or some of the other activities of the Trump family that seem, at least from abroad, to be harmless. I wish I could give you a more encouraging report, but I don't see it. I think Xi Jinping next fall will be chosen once again for 5 years. That should end his term formally. But already there's talk that he'll do what some other Asian dictators have done and try to find some way to extend his term. And he's an admirer of Mr. Putin, and maybe we'll hear later, because Putin has found ways to extend his term. And I think we can expect Mr. Xi to try to continue along those lines. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Should I just squeeze in somehow? So I need some space. Okay, that's better. So the Israeli problem of gauging public opinion is the opposite one. It's not non-transparency, it's over-transparency. And China may be...
A little closer to you.
I will.
Yeah.
So China may be ever so slightly larger than Israel. But Israel has 8 million people who notoriously have 8 million views about most everything. So on the eve of the elections, there was a poll conducted by a radio station with interesting results. So about 37 of the respondents claimed that Trump would be a better choice for Israel, and only about 30 claimed that Clinton will. But when it came to the question, who would you vote for if you could vote, the results were opposite. So about 41 respondents said that they would vote for Clinton, while only 30 said they would vote for Trump. And this division also has a strong gender component. So the vast majority of women rejected Trump outright. A small majority of men preferred Trump. And I think there's similar dynamics to what we heard about China. Trump is somewhat popular in Israel for being blunt, unvarnished, for not engaging in political correctness. You know, one source for me to gauge public opinion in Israel is my 86-year-old mother, with whom I speak on a daily basis, like a good Jewish boy that I am. And the conversation invariably comes back to a question that she keeps asking, which is, what is the crazy man in the White House is up to this day? But my mother does not really represent Israeli public opinion. I think that a large portion of the Israeli public is very much pro-Trump, especially the extreme right, the settlers in the West Bank. They were quite ecstatic when he was elected. There was some messianic moment, a sensation that he would be a game changer, that he would accept the vision of Greater Israel, support the settlements, and once and for all get rid of the illusion in their view of the two-state solution. Trump was compared to Cyrus the Great, this 6th century BC Persian ruler that sent the exiles from Zion back to their homeland and authorized the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. Following that, on, I believe, Valentine's Day, 2 months ago, there was a love fest in Washington, D.C. between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. Netanyahu and his wife looked very, very happy. He was giddy. There's a lot in common to the two of them. Both of them have shared contempt for Obama. There were many promises that were made to Israel on the eve of the elections. And yesterday, and perhaps we should also talk about yesterday at the same point, after the missile attack, the cruise missile attack in Syria, Netanyahu was one of the first world leaders to congratulate Trump. He seemed very happy about the idea that the United States is reclaiming its role as a world policeman. At the same time, this is just a speculation, but I think it has a grain of truth. I think on some level, deep in his heart, Netanyahu would have some preference for Clinton as a president for the following reasons. First, she's predictable. Secondarily, she would have been in his back pocket. I mean, he outmaneuvered Obama. There was no reason for him to expect anything different from Clinton. And thirdly, Jerusalem often prefers a split government in Washington, D.C. It's like a child of divorced parents. If you don't get your candy from one parent, you go to the other. It worked wonderfully over the last 40 years. Moreover, I think that reality begins to sink in even among the settlers. So Trump is not going to move the embassy to Jerusalem anytime soon. It's not going to happen. He's very much committed, according to what he has been saying over the last few months, to promoting the peace between Israel and Palestine, to make a deal with the Palestinians, that the expression that he uses. Mike Pence said last week that all kind of concessions or compromises will have to be made. David Friedman, the new ambassador to Israel, is an extreme right-wing supporter, but Jason Greenblatt, who is formerly the emissary for the peace process in the Middle East, actually gets high marks from both sides of the political spectrum in Israel. He crossed the green light, he met with many Palestinians, and is tweeting incessantly about his friendships with Palestinians and his visits to different refugee camps. So in short, what we see is that Trump goes back to sort of traditional conservative Republican Party, Bush era policy. Is not really a game changer on that level. And I think ironically, he has more leverage on the Israeli government than any of his recent predecessors. Especially his unpredictability, the way that he changes his views on a daily basis, I think sends shivers down the spines of many Israelis, especially on the extreme right. And we already saw that Netanyahu agreed to restrain the building of new settlements and to avoid building new settlements in the West Bank. And surprisingly, none of the leaders of the extreme right opposed this decision by Netanyahu. This would look very, very differently if Hillary Clinton were in the White House. So is Trump going to use his power to bring peace to the Middle East? I doubt. I'm a skeptic. Obviously, despite what happened yesterday, he doesn't have a policy when it comes to the peace process. And I think he showed us over the last few weeks very limited capacity to make deals on the political scene. And if I can have another minute or two just to portray the general picture in Israel, Netanyahu is beleaguered. His political days may be numbered. He's haunted by a few police investigations concerning all kind of corruption cases. But otherwise, I think that Netanyahu, or whoever is going to replace him, is very much interested in continuing the status quo in the Middle East, in part because Israel, despite what you may hear, is doing very well on the security landscape in the following sense, is that Hamas now is surrounded by enemies. Assisi is an enemy of Hamas and doesn't care much about the Palestinians. Hezbollah in the north is very busy with Syria. And it seems that from Netanyahu's point of view, the situation in Syria is just ideal. He gets along with Putin, but he also used the Russian presence in Syria to buttress his position in the West. And Iran became an American issue rather than an Israeli issue. The only opposition is the armed resistance of the Palestinians, but over the last year or so, it's been very, very low-key. So as far as Netanyahu and his coalition members are concerned, the status quo is just fine. I'll end here.
Okay, thank you. Masha?
Thank you. So I have the best role today, I think, certainly the best news hook. I want to take you back to September 2013, when you'll recall perhaps Russia hijacked Syria. What was happening then was that President Obama said there was a red line on the use of chemical weapons, couldn't get congressional support for military intervention in Syria. Putin stepped in and said, I'll take care of it, and wrote, and this is important, in op-ed in the New York Times, in which he used American language against the United States, sort of calling it out for exceptionalism and ignoring international law and the will of the Security Council, where Russia had repeatedly vetoed proposed measures against Syria. Now, that was a moment of absolute triumph for Putin. This was a moment that he had been working toward for his entire 12 years, at that point, 13 years in office. He wanted to reestablish himself personally and Russia as a power to be reckoned with on the world stage, a power to be feared. And of course, the appearance of being able to save the situation, allow everyone to save face, was a very important part of it. It was a moment of absolute triumph, I want to say it again. For him, there's also, I think, some personal identification with Assad. He perceives Assad as the only legitimate leader of Syria. He has said this on many occasions, and it is not a meaningless statement for him. He has every reason to identify with Assad, to view himself as an unjustly criticized, but the only legitimate leader of Russia. And so to stand by while the United States intervenes militarily in Syria, which has a regime, in response to a regime that he views as the only legitimate regime, one that is perhaps unfairly criticized, is for him something that he has a personal stake in. Right? Now, after his moment of triumph in September 2013, Putin didn't really know what hit him and how within a year, or really within months of that incredible moment, he ended up an international pariah. He certainly did not expect the kind of reaction that he got from the West to the anti-gay campaign in Russia. He certainly didn't expect so many Western leaders, and especially the US president, whom he had just helped out, right, to not come to the biggest personal party of his career, which was the Sochi Olympics in February 2014. And I'm not even sure that he expected the kind of unified Western reaction to the annexation of Crimea and the war in eastern Ukraine that he got. It was a very sudden and sort of disastrous fall from the grace of that moment in September 2013, right? And that moment, again, it hinged on Syria. Right? So I'm trying to obviously put into context what happened last night. In September 2015, Putin came to New York for to speak at the General Assembly of the United Nations. It was the first time in 10 years that he had set foot in the United Nations. This was the 70th anniversary celebration of the United Nations, and he gave a speech, a very carefully designed speech, and the whole appearance was a well thought out gambit. In the speech, he asserted, as we now say without any evidence, that the United Nations had been founded in Yalta, and well, there's scant evidence to support that there was some talk in Yalta about the need for a new international order. But he basically proposed a deal to the United States in his speech. He said, let's fight ISIS together, and it will be a joint effort like the anti-Hitler coalition. And what he meant by that is that he wanted to go back to the deal that the Soviet Union had with the West as part of the anti-Hitler coalition, which was basically to carve up the world and to write off all the crimes of the Soviet regime that had preceded or coincided with World War II. Right? He wanted that kind of deal again. He wanted to write off Ukraine. He wanted to recarve up the world. And in exchange, he would join forces with the United States in fighting ISIS. President Obama did not even meet with him. That was a slap in the face that I don't think he expected. A week later, Russia began bombing Syria. So that's how we got to this place that and that puts into context what happened last night. Now, if you think that you've had a very difficult time sort of modulating your mood in response to news, and in the last 80 days, I think that probably Putin has had a similarly difficult time. because right after the election, the American election, he took a victory lap. And he had, at his highly orchestrated annual press conference, he had a correspondent ask him the question, what does it feel like to be the most powerful man in the world? He really thought that that he'd done very well. Now, Putin is not a great thinker and certainly not a strategist. To him, it was a great victory because he couldn't imagine that Hillary Clinton would have become president. That would have been unthinkable. That would have been insulting. That would have been just awful. Whereas Trump is somebody that he finds relatable, and I think that I found some resonance with what Jerry was saying. Trump seems to be somebody that a lot of Russians find relatable. Trump is he seems to dislike many of the things about the United States that Russians dislike about the United States. I have had many Russians, including people that I normally see eye to eye with on many things, say, "Well, isn't this a backlash against political correctness? And isn't he real? And isn't he a pragmatist because he's such a successful businessman?" I think that more fundamentally, Trump shares a worldview that both Putin and a lot of Russians hold, which is that the world is rotten, that everything is up for sale, that there is no such thing as values-based politics, that it is time to throw off the mask of hypocrisy, and all that stuff. And so there was an unspoken, and in some cases spoken, assumption that this was somebody that Russia could deal with because all the extraneous stuff would fall away, and finally, we would get to re-carve up the world, right? And instead, Trump, without provocation, as far as Russia is concerned, starts bombing Syria last night. Now, this to Putin is a slap in the face, but it is also it also demands of him a major readjustment, because for the last certainly since 2007, since his Munich speech, he has played the role of the unpredictable actor on the world stage. He has played the role of the guy who will always be crazier than the other guy, and that everyone has to always be concerned with containing and cajoling and comforting and responding to. That changed last night. There's a cacophony, as there usually is in Russian media and the Russian blogosphere. One of the amusing threads is in all of this is that Trump's aides are playing him, that he is fine, he's still a good guy, but the Boyers are bad, and they're bombing Syria. But there's a major readjustment, obviously, of attitudes going on in Moscow right now, and the best case scenario is that they somehow find their way to that conversation about carving up the world, and that is not a great case scenario, but it's the best case scenario, because this is deal making, right? This is actually a language that they can both speak. The worst case scenario, I don't even want to try to conjure, but it's awful.
Thank you. Clara?
Well, the disadvantage of going forth, particularly after both China and Russia, is that there are going to be many threads here that sound familiar, but there are also going to be some that maybe are reshuffled in interesting ways in the case of Iran. Again, talking about how Iran views the United States is not a simple question, as it isn't for any place else. It's a country of 75, 80 million people, depending who you ask. And furthermore, you have in Iran an establishment that is interestingly divided and notoriously factionalized. So I'm going to try to break this down as simply as I can, and also again with the caveat that there is no credible public opinion polling available from Iran. Within the Iranian establishment, I think we tend these days to divide the political establishment into two groups. You have the hardliners, who include the security establishment, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, and ultimately the supreme leader is the figurehead on top of that establishment. And then we have the elected government, which is variously described as moderate or pragmatic, or in some cases they're called reformists, but in this moment I would think moderate or pragmatic is probably more accurate. So I'll start with Khamenei and the security establishment, which does hold the lion's share of the power of the deeper state. It includes the intelligence apparatus for the most part, and much of the more muscular piece of the foreign policy apparatus. Khamenei, at least publicly, claims to like Trump. In the advance of the American election, a really curious thing happened. Iranian state television aired the American presidential debates in full. This never happened before. And part of the reason for this was that Trump was a useful figure for this part of the Iranian state. Why? Because of two things. On the one hand, you might look at Trump and say, this is a man who instantiates everything that the Iranian regime loves to hate about America. He's vulgar, he's materialistic, he boasts about assaulting women, he's racist. All of these things feed a stereotype, but that's not the only reason. He not only instantiates so much of what the Iranian establishment loves to hate about America, he also articulates it. So his campaign rhetoric, much of which had this kind of dark cast of the United States as a failing power and its institutions crumbling, and the language of American carnage appealed very much to Khamenei and to his part of the Iranian establishment. Why? Because, as he put it in a tweet relatively recently, this man is saying everything that Khamenei has been saying about America for the last 30 years. So, Trump was an attractive figure to that part of the Iranian government, and he also was a convenient figure, because if we look back at the last 4 years in Barack Obama's second term in office, we've had this historic turn in Iranian-American relations with the signing of the nuclear deal, and with perhaps even more significant symbolically, bilateral relations for the first time since the Iranian Revolution. We've had talks between high-level people in both countries' foreign policy apparatus. So that's been a major turn, and it's been largely driven by the moderate, pragmatic wing of the government, but it has been tolerated from the hardline side. The position of the hardliners at various times has been obstructionist. They've tried to stop the deal. They have been vociferously opposed to it. They've tried to intimidate the Rouhani administration out of negotiating with the United States. But they have also, in the end, there would be no nuclear deal if Khamenei hadn't ultimately decided to tolerate it. What I was told, and I don't have a way to confirm this, but his attitude was essentially, the Americans can't be trusted, and you will see this in good time. Go ahead, sign that deal. It's going to fall apart. So as far as Khamenei is concerned, part of the reason that he may embrace Trump is that Trump confirms the bias that he brings to the table to begin with. He also, the reversal in the apparent American approach to Iran is, it serves the narrative that the Iranian regime has set forth from the start. So the anti-Americanism has a long and interesting history under the Islamic Republic, and for Khamenei's part of the regime, it is an essential history and an essential component. So I think that on that side, there is some degree of relief that the kind of confusing moment of this reawakening of some kind of bilateral relationship and the opening of Iran possibly toward cultural influences from abroad with the opening of the economy, that all of this may be brought to a welcome close by the reintroduction of hardline antipathies on both sides. Also, one thing that you do hear frequently in Iran, and this is in a way a mirror of our own account of Iranian politics. There's a sense particularly among hardliners, that American Democrats are worrisome because you don't know, they may talk a good game, but you don't really know if they have the power to produce what they promise. And you don't really know who you're dealing with. It's one face and there's another face of the American regime. And here with the Republicans, particularly with those that talk tough, what you see is what you get. So these are people we can deal with. So that's one strain of the Iranian regime. But the other strain of it, the moderates and pragmatists, are in a much more difficult position. And by this is the elected government of President Hassan Rouhani and his well-known foreign minister, Javad Zarif, the people who have really committed a huge amount of political capital to negotiating with the United States over the nuclear program, and had a view, I believe, to a longer-term strategic, if not an alliance, but to some kind of dialogue that could continue. I don't want to suggest that these people were sort of trusting supplicants to the United States. They never were. I think the entire of the Iranian establishment holds the United States very much in suspicion. There is a sense that even where we ostensibly share common interests, say against ISIS, the Americans are not to be trusted. They're not transparent with us. They're not going to work with us. They will serve their own interests. They feel, by the way, the same way about Russia. But this strain of the establishment did believe that the best approach was dialogue and was to have a kind of a continuing negotiation and an open line of communication. So they staked everything on that. That was Rouhani's promise coming into office, was to negotiate this nuclear deal. It was fulfilled. And then not, a year later, we suddenly have this American president who is promising to tear it to shreds and who is making rather direct threats against Iran. So this is bad news for Rouhani and for his team. And it matters because there is an Iranian presidential election coming next month. So it makes them look weak, it makes them look foolish, and it's not the first time this has happened, by the way. Iran had a reformist presidency, you may remember, from 1997 to 2005 under Mohammad Khatami, and it was during the period when the Khatami administration was quietly working with the Bush administration in Afghanistan and Iraq when the axis of evil speech put a sudden and dramatic end to any capacity that the Iranians had to say that this was a negotiation they could keep afloat. So there's a history to this, and the reformists were embittered by that experience and felt that it killed them politically. So that's what's at stake for Rouhani and his team, and it's not minor. It may be a moment where the upper administration, the Khamenei and the boards of clerics that wield tremendous influence within the Iranian system, may say this is not a moment to have a government that looks conciliatory in any way. So there's that. But it's also, to talk about the response of the Iranian people is, I can't promise to do that with tremendous depth because one can't take the measure of the response of the Iranian people, but I do want to just address at least sort of where we start. As many of you undoubtedly know, the populace in Iran has, in spite of the very vociferous anti-American official statements, has tended to be more pro-American than virtually any population in the Middle East. And this is partly a product of long relationships that have crossed what seem to be insurmountable but are not borders. And it's partly a reaction to heavy government propaganda. So you have a lot of people who say everything the government tells me is false and they tell me to hate America, so I don't. It's also a consequence of a longing, particularly among young people, for connection to the world, and they feel shut in by their government and they want to reach out, and the United States is a symbol of global youth culture, cosmopolitanism, all of these things that are much yearned for within Iran. That has waxed and waned over the years, at least that I've been engaged with this subject. I think that there was something of an uptick of anti-Americanism under Ahmadinejad. Barack Obama was really popular when he was elected in 2008. 2009, people were very split over how he handled the Green Movement. There were definitely people inside Iran who felt that they had looked to Obama for more vocal support, and then there were people who really wanted none of that. So, but nonetheless, the outreach of the Obama administration was unmistakable. There were messages being sent into Iran in Persian. We had a Persian language spokesperson for the State Department who was a very popular figure inside of Iran. There was definitely a sense that this was an administration that wanted to reach out to the Iranian people and that wanted to engage. That's over, and not only is it over, but dramatically so, because the visa ban, as much as it affects a list of 7 countries, there can be no mistake that the overwhelming majority of the people affected by this are Iranians. That is the country that sends the most people into the United States on that list, and that had the most at stake, frankly. And it's also a country that has no history of exporting terrorists into the United States. So the message that has been sent to the Iranian people is a devastating one. And I don't know in the end like how that will be received or how we recover from that. I do know one sort of little moment now, a month past, that was sort of amazing to watch was when the Iranian Revolution it happened in February of 1979. So every February the anniversary is celebrated. And usually that comes with a lot of burning of American flags. So this year, an interesting thing happened. You would have expected it to be a particularly intense year for flag burning. This is right after the visa ban. Instead, there was a hashtag that went up on Twitter called Love Beyond Flags. And there were people saying, did you see all those Americans who came out to airports to protest the visa ban? Respect them, don't burn their flag. So you had signs that you saw in some of the pictures of the demonstrations. There was one sign in English that said, what was it? Down with American regime, long live American people. Stuff like that. So there was, and to me what was particularly moving about that response was that these people were responding by making a separation between the American government and the people, which is what they had long asked others to do for them, in spite of the fact that the American president had been democratically elected. So there was something sort of poignant in that these particular people were sending forth this message without regard to whether or not the majority of Americans had elected this president. So I don't know how widespread that sentiment is among Iranians, or I do know that apparently the turnout for that celebration was larger than usual, and normally that is limited to basically conservative people, and this year a lot of people were rallying around the Iranian flag in a sense that their country may be under attack. So, not to sort of overlook the fact that the Trump administration, so far, there has not been any incident with Iran. However, what happened last night certainly affects Iran's sense of Trump's willingness to move militarily against Iranian interests. And they certainly, there have been statements like, putting Iran on notice, and the fact that Flynn is no longer in the administration, but both Flynn and Mattis were people who came in with well-known obsessive focuses on Iran and antipathy toward Iran. So there's definitely a feeling over there, I think, of insecurity. They don't know what's coming next. They don't know what's going to happen either to the nuclear deal or to their basic security. And I know one thing that I can say is that after the election in November, there was a big influx of Iranian intelligence gathering about the United States. My sort of joke about it at the time was that you now have this kind of mirror image of what we think of the American stance on Iran. You have all these people in Tehran sitting around thinking, is this American administration rational? Are they ideologues? How do we predict their actions? And that's pretty much where we are.
All right. Let me give you a sense of how popular is the current administration in Latin America in general. My sense is that it's extremely unpopular. And it is unpopular for several reasons. Number one, because for those ones who in the region identify with the concept of liberal democracy, the idea of having in Washington a new leader who represents populism sounds very familiar. And just keep in mind that the region, Latin America, believes that they are the master of producing populist leaders, chauvinist leaders, leaders who are careful enough to keep some sort of facade of democracy, but they, their agenda is essentially populism. And we have been able to produce all sort of populist leaders, left-wing, right-wing. But by far, probably the most respected one is Perón from Argentina. But since Perón, we have a record of somebody like Fujimori in Peru, Uribe in Colombia, and obviously Chavez. Now, the policies of the current administration probably are going to help another populist leader to get elected in Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who has been almost 3 times president of Mexico, has get very, very close in the electoral process, 3 times before. He represents a nationalist view. He has an autocratic view of society. I don't think he understands concepts like fundamental freedoms and rights. And my sense, he also has been able to, for years, to campaign and exploit in some sort of anti-Americanist view, which is very easy today to develop, given the imminent massive deportation of Mexicans, 6 million Mexicans with no papers. Obviously, the reaction in Mexico is very strong, but not only Mexico, the rest of the region. Now, when I refer to populism, I'm thinking about somebody who governed the country on a permanent campaign mood, always campaigning, very close to the mic. In his case, very close to Twitter. With very aggressive language that create polarization, language against media and going after freedom of the press, language and very aggressive language against the opposition, the leaders of the oppositions, who are normally described, and I'm not, please, don't think about Trump. Think about Latin leaders who have used successfully those kind of that kind of a style of govern a country, treating their opposition leaders as traitors, criminals. As I said before, going after the media, going after judges and tribunals, and trying to control the tribunals. You know, there are many cases of successful populist leaders in the region who effectively control the Supreme Court and the tribunals, and then they are able to provide some sort of vindication or legitimation to their positions, their decisions, with a hard time of understanding concepts of transparency, conflict of interest, or support for mechanisms to go after corruption. The claim that they represent the people against the establishment, that sounds very familiar, and we have seen that movie in Latin America many times, unfortunately. And obviously, and this is probably the most important one, is announcing or promoting policies that are going to bring short-term benefits to their political base. That is obviously essential. And, but with constant manipulation of the public debate, with very little respect for the fundamentals of a democratic system, of democracy, and with the aspiration or expectation to cling to power and to expand their position in power as far as they can. Now, in that context, my sense is that the current administration is perceived in the region pretty much as toxic. Is difficult to do business with the administration. And one of the probably biggest disappointments was the announcement of Trump to withdraw from the TPP. There is a whole group of governments in the region who believes in free trade. And they thought that TPP was a way to counterbalance China. Now, my sense is that the biggest winner in the region is going to be China. There was a meeting recently in Chile of the Pacific Alliance governments, which represent basically Peru, Chile, Colombia, Mexico. That are the central components, Latin components of TPP. Guess who was the, probably the most important actor invited to that meeting that took place on March 14 and 15th in Viña del Mar, in the coast of Chile? China. So China is filling the vacuum left by the U.S. By the U.S. government. One of my fears, given the perception and the actions of this government in Latin America, is that it might generate or exacerbate some sort of anti-Americanist feelings or positions of the region, without really making a distinction between the Trump administration and what represent America. And that is obviously a serious issue. Another problem is that as a result of the poor and pretty deplorable record on human rights in Latin America during the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, I'm thinking about military dictatorships in South America particularly, but also in Central America. My opinion, my view is that in Latin America, there has been possible to build some pretty precarious consensus on the basics of human rights and freedoms. In other words, the idea that torture is a crime and there is no justification ever for torture is pretty much established in the narrative, in the official discourse in Latin America. I'm not suggesting that there is no torture in the region. Obviously, we do have serious problems of abuses going on in the region. But at least in terms of the discourse, the policies are, in general terms, to have been established to go after those ones who engage in for instance, in torture. But when you have somebody in Washington who is questioning the basics, including the idea of torturing suspected criminals, or what he said during the campaign when he argued that the best way to go after terrorists was to not only to target them but also their families, that type of concepts could end up resonating in the region, especially when you have serious debates regarding security. Security is a serious issue in Latin America. By security, I'm referring to the violence promoted by cartels, organized crime, narco-traffickers, and so on and so forth. And one of the most difficult challenges is to make sure that governments in the region go after those type of crimes, but respecting certain parameters. If you're advocating for policies where there are no limits, no control, no real respect for fundamental due process in Washington, is going to be very difficult to promote accountability and to prevent abuses in the region. My last comment is that as long as Trump continues stigmatizing Mexico, Mexicans, and harassing Mexico, it's going to be very difficult for Latin governments to work with the administration on very urgent issues such as the virtual dictatorship that we are facing in Venezuela. The last thing that we want in the case of Venezuela is some sort of unilateral action from Washington. That will be music for the ears of those ones who are today running Venezuela. What is necessary is to exercise multilateral pressure where the US is part of the region, but not the one that is imposing some unilateral sanctions against the government. And that applies for Cuba, for Mexico, for any other issue in the region. The trouble is that that will require some sort of collective action, and to work collectively, to work jointly with an administration that recently, for instance, have to appear before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to explain the executive decrees, executive actions, especially on questions of immigration, before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which is the most important body in the region in charge of promoting and defending human rights, and the administration decided not to appear before the commission. I believe for the first time since at least in the last 30 years, is set up exactly the wrong precedent, and it doesn't really help to establish some minimal credibility for this administration to promote human rights in the region. Thanks.
One of the things that is apparent to me after listening to the discussion is that my hope of finding common threads in the presentations is not going to be fulfilled. That in each case, it seemed to me that our panelists spoke about the response in a particular region, which indicates that Trump and the Trump administration play into the thinking within the different countries, but they don't fundamentally shift. The advent of the Trump administration doesn't fundamentally shift the attitude towards the United States. That there are different forces in different countries, and that those forces see the advent of the administration in a manner which fits with their attitudes and their prejudices, rather than in ways which suggest some global response or some universal response to the advent of the Trump administration. Yes, Jerry?
I just wanted to comment on that. There is a common thread with respect to Iran, Russia, and China. In this respect, they all fear undermining by the U.S. through the use of foreign NGOs. They all fear that we're going to undermine them.
Although I would say
the
that
color revolution.
that started
Of course.
before the advent of Trump. Russia adopted its legislation on foreign agents
Yes.
a few years ago. In China, the process started before Trump. Iran has had that concern for a long time. And today, there are a great many countries, even India, has taken steps to limit the role that foreign non-governmental organizations today. I think there are as many as 50 countries around the world which have discovered this means of trying to limit the actions of non-governmental organizations. I would say, however, and Masha, I'd be interested in your comment on this, that some years ago, Putin was the person who really initiated that effort. That is, in response to the Orange Revolution in Ukraine and the Tulip Revolution in Kyrgyzstan, that Putin spread the word that this was a way of undermining those states, and that governments ought to take some kind of action to limit foreign non-governmental organizations. Is that fair in terms of Russia?
Absolutely. I mean, the idea that protest is never spontaneous. It's always it always comes from the outside, probably from the U.S. State Department, and by way of non-governmental organizations that receive foreign funding. That's absolutely true. I mean, I don't know that Putin is necessarily the originator of this idea. I seem to recall Milosevic kicking foreign funding for NGOs, and in fact the Open Society Foundation out of Belgrade back in 1999. But that specific link to the color revolutions, that's Putin's copyright. Yeah.
Well,
The
one
Iranians
question
have
I
taken that up
wanted to
lock, stock,
ask
and barrel.
members of the panel, if you asked those in the United States to say why they are critical of Trump, I think probably the issue that would be foremost in the responses you would get is a xenophobia that Trump has expressed. His attitude towards Muslims coming into the United States, the way in which he labeled Mexican immigrants to the United States, and so forth. Laura spoke about the impact in Iran of the limits on Muslims coming to the United States, and the way that particularly affected Iranians. I did see some figures recently on the number of Iranian doctors there are in the United States, and it suggested that in many parts of rural America, you would not have a physician except for the Iranian doctors who are practicing in those communities. But I wonder if, other than Iran, the xenophobia issue is an issue that figures at all or figures significantly in thinking about the United States after the election. Does it play into xenophobia in those countries, or is it a factor in some other way in thinking about the United States?
You forgot racism, misogyny, and some
Yes,
other.
and xenophobia, as far as I'm concerned, embraces quite a lot of things.
Okay, Israel is actually very concerned about anti-Semitism in the United States and the way it rose over the last few months. And I think misogyny is also a theme in the way that the Israelis talk about Trump. I think what happened with Trump in the United States, that the way that he spoke, tweeted, and so on and so forth, created a license to hate, and a license to hate publicly. So moving away from the kind of decorum about any of those issues that was in place over the last 20 years, and to speaking from the point of view of Israel, which I know is very, very limited, you see some of that in Israel as well. That the kind, it gives license to articulation of all kind of ideas that beforehand were not on the surface, and I think obviously it's a problem. I just want to say one thing in response to what Masha said about Syria, if I can, if you allow me. You talked about legitimacy and also the kind of aspirations that Putin had. But I think we also have to acknowledge that Syria represents a huge asset for Russia, and in a way, for me, it's a repeat of what happened in 1970 on the Suez Canal, that Egypt was threatened by Israel because of strategic bombing, and suddenly one day, few divisions of air defense, Russian divisions of air defense appeared on the canal manned by Russian soldiers. And that was known as the Kavkaz operation back then, and in a way what happened in Syria is just a repeat of that. In part because I think Putin and Russia and the Soviet Union before them were thirsty to have a stronghold in the Mediterranean, and Latakia or whatever Syrian port is available is a major, major strategic asset. And they're going to stay there. As long as they can, they're going to stay there.
I specifically didn't focus on Russia's strategic and possible economic interests in Syria because I don't actually think they're that important. And when we focus on strategic interests, that creates the impression, well, that can be negotiated. That at some point Russia might decide that it's costing it too much to stay in that region. But ambition cannot be negotiated. Ambition is never given up because it's because it's too expensive, and I think that's personal identification and a feeling of personally being threatened works the same way. So I think that's more important and more dangerous.
I think the Chinese are very concerned about the North Korean threat or the U.S. threat to do to North Korea what we just did last night to Syria, that there might be some unannounced sudden missile attack to get rid of the nuclear progress that North Korea has made and the progress in missile delivery of nuclear weapons. Trump, after making in May during the campaign a statement about I'd love to sit and deal with Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, later made some very threatening statements that make people afraid that he might do something suddenly, just like last night against Syria. And some people think the action taken last night was for the benefit of Xi Jinping as they sat down in Florida to try to increase the pressure on China to really coerce the North Koreans to give up their quest for nuclear power. So it's the unexpected that really concerns people, and our placement now of an anti-missile system in South Korea has frightened China very, very much, and it has really prejudiced China's relations with South Korea because of the pressure China is applying to South Korea to change its policy. It's a mixed picture.
Okay. With that, why don't we open this up to questions from the audience? There are microphones on each side, and if you'd line up at microphones and give us your name and ask a question if it's directed to a particular person, if you would say so. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Ann Waters, and my question is for the panelists to take up what Laura Secor had started in talking about the response of the Iranian people to the protest demonstrations and opposition to the Trump administration, whether judicial or street engagement. So particularly for China and for Russia, really what is the threat that the American opposition and mobilization takes? Thank you.
Okay. The question was whether or what the response is to the protests against Trump's policies that Laura mentioned in connection with the people who went to the airports to protest the immigration limits. Has that resonated in other parts of the world?
But also the street marches?
Can't hear you.
The street marches and others.
Street marches, such as the Women's March right after Trump's inauguration. Has that had an impact? Masha, in terms of Russia?
Well, Russia doesn't have a free media, so in a word, no, it hasn't registered.
I mean, interestingly, Iran doesn't either, but somehow those images made it over there. One thing I just wanted to add that I realized I didn't say when discussing the response of the Iranian people is that, unlike it sounds in Russia and in China, Iran, the general political outlook of the country is left. So there's a sort of sense that Trump, he's not, even if he's useful as a stalking horse for Khamenei, as a sort of general cultural response, I don't think you get the same. I think there's a revulsion there that has to do with what he stands for, that may be different from what you see in post-communist societies.
Anybody else want to respond to that?
Well, in China, you just can't do it. Ever since the Falun Gong put 10,000 people in front of the Chinese leadership headquarters in 1999, without the secret police knowing it was going to happen, the Chinese have just used every weapon to suppress any popular movement, any protest movement. And they deal very harshly with people who try it.
Okay. Let me take a question on this side. Go ahead.
Okay. This is for Jose Miguel Vivanco. I'm sorry, I'm right here. So you spoke about how important it would be for the U.S. right now to tackle the Venezuela problem multilaterally as opposed to sort of tyrannically. Excuse me. So I'm wondering, the context in Latin America is shifting in that regard. I'm from Argentina, and of course, our current government, Macri, has represented a huge shift from the previous, I dare say, very populist government of the Kirchners, who was aligned with Venezuela. Now Macri has been insisting that it should be suspended from the Mercosur and all sorts of other things. So on the one hand, it seems like Trump may be gaining allies. By the way, Macri does not like him, of course, and wanted Hillary to win, but such is the case. And so on the one hand, there's Argentina and other governments that are more center-right at the moment. And on the other hand, I mean, we know what Venezuela is going through and has been going through for a while now, but given what happened last week with the Supreme Court taking over the legislative branch of government, which was, of course, a scandal. And I believe today the government of Maduro has sort of come up with some excuse to keep Capriles, who is, of course, a very important member of the opposition, from renewing or seeking another term in Miranda, where he currently governs, for 15 years or something. So, of course, all sorts of terrible things are happening there, and it seems like more countries in the OAS and Latin America in general might be reacting to that. So I'm wondering, on the one hand, the change in government in Argentina, and on the other, the fact that more countries are now appalled by what's happening in Venezuela, if that'll give Trump more of an in multilaterally. Sorry, that was long.
Look, I think we are seeing some action at the Organization of American States in spite of Trump. Normally, if the president in Washington were President Obama or President Clinton, you will see a full engagement and some leadership. But the region is, fortunately, reacting to the developments in Venezuela in a way that they are making some concrete demands to that government. For instance, the immediate and unconditional release of the political prisoners in Venezuela. There are over 100 political prisoners. By political prisoners, we are referring to individuals who are in prison for crimes of opinion with no due process, no evidence that could justify their detention. The most prominent case is the case of Leopoldo Lopez, but there are many more in prison, and they are subject of, in some cases, of torture and cruel treatment, mistreatment. The agency that runs the business of harassing and repression in Venezuela is the intelligence agency called SEBIN, and they have license and they have a capacity to detain anyone. But they normally work together with the gangs of delinquents with license to carry weapons called colectivos, and that go after media, journalists, independent journalists, civil society, and members of the opposition. The country that is supposed to actually exercise some leadership in South America, given its weight and size and historically its economy, is Brazil. But it's pretty much missing in action. Not because the current Brazilian government has any sympathy for the Venezuelan government, but it's going through a very, very serious economic debacle and political crisis. So they are paying some attention to the region, and but not enough. The good news is that we have a president in Peru called Pedro Pablo Kuczynski, who is a remarkable leader and who has been pressing and pressing and pressing for the application of what we call the democratic charter in the case of Venezuela. Venezuela is every day more isolated, and they don't have the muscle that they used to have to press and bully the rest of the region, and they have pretty much no prestige. The only one that is constantly supporting Venezuela is Cuba, that obviously depends on Venezuela for cheap oil or pretty much free oil, and Mexico has been taking actually surprisingly a very visible positions against the current government of Venezuela. So I am pretty hopeful that with the leadership of the current Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Luis Almagro, plus the new context in the region, and without much relevance from the Trump administration, which I think is good news, we will be able to build up some effective multilateral pressure on that government that will force them to call, for instance, for elections soon, release of political prisoners, and the reestablishment of the autonomy and independence of different branches of government, particularly the judiciary.
Jerry Spivak, and this question is for the whole panel. It regards the potentially positive effect of Donald Trump. And the question is this: since the end of the Second World War, the role of the presidents have been basically to make sure that America is the central power of the world. I'm wondering how you would feel if, as a result of Donald Trump, America is no longer the central power of the world, but collapses into insignificance, and the countries you've been talking about become important, such as China with its vast population in the world.
Let me give you a quick response to that. You have, as leaders of important countries today, Putin in Russia, you have Xi Jinping in China, you have Erdogan in Turkey, you have Sisi in Egypt. We have smaller countries like Duterte in the Philippines, and Orban in Hungary, and Kaczynski in Poland, and Razak in Malaysia, and so on and so forth. You could go around the world today, and you won't find very many leaders who might have a more beneficial impact. You might have Angela Merkel in Germany, you might have Justin Trudeau in Canada, and then you may have exhausted the list.
Let me be clearer then in relation to what you said. Basically, what I'm saying is that America has represented, since the Second World War, the capability of using almost as many nuclear weapons as Russia, or possibly more, and it has not represented what China has been doing, which is going in and building infrastructure in Africa and in Central America. I'm just wondering whether it's potentially possible for the world, and for dealing with things like climate change, that new people with new views would be better than this country.
Well, I wouldn't want to be the one to tell the people in Japan or South Korea or Taiwan or even Vietnam or even Thailand, certainly not Indonesia, that they'll be happy to see the U.S. Crater and just leave them on their own, because they'll be extremely vulnerable. And these are countries to varying extents that have impressive democracies and basic freedoms. And they may not last long if Trump really pulls in our wings significantly. What we're seeing with Trump so far is something inconsistent. And you have to deal with what he says on a given occasion and what he does. He's running the risk of looking like a paper tiger to some countries, because his big talk, for better or worse, isn't being vindicated in practice. I think he is helping China by getting us out of the TPP economic agreement. We're waiting to see what he'll do with respect to military matters in the South China Sea, and South Korea, and the East China Sea. We don't know. But I'm not in favor of seeing the U.S. withdraw from the world. I do recognize your concern about the way we use weapons. And that's a problem of U.S. public law, constitutional law. And what Trump did last night raises severe questions of U.S. domestic law. Was he authorized to do that under existing legislation? And international law. But it's one of those things he just did, and it's not the first time we've acted like that. But I think you may be throwing out the baby with the bath if we just pull back and let China certainly dominate East Asia. Nobody in the Southeast Asia, Singapore, Australia, what would happen to them? It would be a terrible fate for them.
I can add about 20 countries on the Eurasian continent to Jerry's list of countries that would experience America's weakening as an existential threat. And there's also, when the Soviet Union was collapsing, our biggest concern was what was going to happen to its nuclear arsenal. What is going to happen to the nuclear arsenal of this country if it falls into passivity and irrelevance?
Okay, let's go to another question over here.
Thank you, everybody. It was a wonderful talks, all of you. My name is Vered Malin, and I'm concerned with the Trump administration has brought us to the point where everything is seen as a zero-sum game. No more cooperation, consensus. And he's very transactional. So my big question is, at the end of 4 years, do you see Trump bringing us to conflagration, war even, with many of the countries represented on the dais, or in Israel, for example, another intifada? Where do you think we'll go in 4 years after all this negativity?
There's a struggle underway. We read about it every day. Who is going to guide American policy? And you have sharply conflicting views. You have conflicting personalities in the White House. You have huge tensions between the White House and the various departments, starting with the State Department. You have a policy Trump seems to be developing of allowing the military, the Pentagon, particularly a freer ability to make some decisions. I don't know to what extent last night's decision is the product of this new Pentagon freedom. You're asking the right question, but the struggle is on, and how it will be resolved, I don't know. A few days before Flynn had to flee, I said on the Charlie Rose show there would start to be casualties from the White House. I didn't expect Flynn to go quite so fast. Now it is very intense struggle, of course, and what the role of Jared Kushner is going to be vis-a-vis Steve Bannon and vis-a-vis this fellow Cohen from Goldman Sachs and the others. And this, I can't imagine a more intense, perhaps even vicious struggle that's underway now that will provide the answer to your very good question.
Laura?
I mean, apparently, at least along this panel, the low-hanging fruit would be Iran. And certainly the sort of most vociferous martial noise has been directed at Iran. But what we don't know, obviously not really having a very clear idea of how this administration conceives of its interests or what its strategy may or may not be, is, in the past, even under the Bush administration, which was certainly liberal in its use of force, every time this question came to the fore and war plans were under examination, nobody ever thought that going to war with Iran was a good idea. And it's long been my general contention that nobody wants that. The noise about it has been useful for both the Iranian regime and at times for the US government as well. However, at this moment, we really can't say, because first we have the United States entering into a war in Syria that the Iranians are deeply engaged in, and we have an administration that seems that we really can't predict its attitudes, its interests, and it has been making a lot of bellicose noises, particularly in the direction of Iran. It's the first time that I've actually regarded those rumors with concern.
I'm a historian. I can barely understand the past, let alone predict the future. But And it's too early, obviously, to know. I think one thing becomes clearer is that Trump campaigned as a populist and a disruptor, and rules more like a Republican. So perhaps he's not Putin's doll or puppy, but he's Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan's puppy. So I think we'll see more of what transpired about 10 or 15 years ago. I see the kind of incompetence that was displayed by the Trump administration of the last few weeks, both disconcerting but also reassuring on some level, in the sense that I think his capacity to inflict, I hope so, major damage is incredibly limited.
Okay. But anybody else want to? Or?
I'll just make a quick comment that I think most people probably don't understand that Russia has framed its wars in Ukraine and Syria as proxy wars against the United States. And it wouldn't take much to inflame that further. Sort of, basically, the only what's kept the U.S. from engaging was an administration bent on disengagement with Russia.
Okay. Look, we've got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to call on one question here and one there, but I think that will have to be as many as we can take. So go ahead.
Two mini questions that both have very short answers. I wasn't going to ask this first one, but then I heard the word Milosevic, and I wanted to ask the panel, perhaps the world and just generally speaking, what happened last night can be perceived not as terrible, but as wonderful for the image of America. What are your thoughts on that? And a question for Mr. Polanco. On the outreach of Peña Nieto to Trump over the last few months. I'm a teacher, and when my students do silly things, I say to them, what were you thinking? So what was Peña Nieto thinking on his outreach to Donald Trump? Those two questions. Thank you so much.
I'll try the answer to the first one. I was one of those who thought that President Obama made a big mistake in not taking action when Syria crossed the red line with the use of poison gas in the first instance. Obviously, there are questions about the legality of the use of force, but as far as a policy question is concerned, my own view was that I was in favor of this kind of response to the chemical weapons attack.
Raises the question whether every time something horrible is done by another government, the U.S. just unilaterally goes in as the policeman of the world. And if the conduct that provoked our reaction is so bad, I think, in fact, the world isn't fussy about whether there was authorization in the U.S. law or whether international law permits unilateral action in the circumstances. But I worry about it.
On the Mexico question, there are many theories about why the president of Mexico invited Donald Trump when he was a candidate. But I think there is something important that could be useful to understand. The person who, in the cabinet of President Peña Nieto, orchestrated the visit was the finance minister, Mr. Videgaray, at that time. And the reaction in Mexico was so negative for this visit, and that Videgaray, the finance minister, paid the price, and he resigned, he left the cabinet. And the hope of Mexicans was that, obviously, Hillary Clinton would be elected eventually. So when they learned that Trump was back in action and was elected president, just few weeks after that one, the president of Mexico decided to appoint Videgaray as the foreign minister. And why is that? Because Videgaray managed during that process to develop apparently a good working relationship with Trump and Trump inner circle. And now Videgaray is actually this week in Washington negotiating NAFTA, where the rumors is that that they're not going to be apparently dramatic change on the question of NAFTA, given multiple reasons, including the pressure from the border states. Secondly, if you check the numbers of illegal immigrants, Mexican illegal immigrants, are pretty much flat. Those ones who are deported, similar to before and even down. The numbers. So they are not already engaging aggressively, probably because they don't have the resources. The wall is under serious questioning, not just because it's extremely costly, but also apparently it's not practical. And General Kelly, the Secretary of Homeland Security, who threatened to, in order to discourage the immigration of Central American families, to capture at the border the parents and to keep the kids in the US. He is just 48 hours ago rethinking that proposal, and looks like it's not going to happen. So, bottom line, looks like the government of Mexico has the right connection with the Trump administration to negotiate all of these bilateral problems.
Okay. I had said there'd be one more question.
That's right.
A quick question.
Yeah, very quick. Actually, I don't have a question. This is Prabhakaran, an alumnus of the new school. I just want to follow up on this, what this lady said. She doesn't have to be unduly concerned about what will happen to the world or to the country after 4 years. He won't last 4 years. Let the FBI complete its investigation. His election will be invalidated. 2, the bunch of amateurs he has packed in his administration, an internecine battle is already on among them. They are going to self-destruct. Thank you.
That wasn't a question. Can I ask a question?
I want to thank, no more. It's after 8 o'clock, and we want to end now. I want to thank the panel. I think the panel was really quite extraordinary. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. You did a very good job.